Hey guys, Phaze here. In today's video, we're going to deep dive a build that chills enemies to death with cold damage over time, better known as Cold Dot. It's an enjoyable, well-rounded caster build that tends to excel as a league starter. It combines 4 spells: Vortex, Creeping Frost, Cold Snap, and Vaal Cold Snap. Unlike many other dot skills, the damage from all 4 of these spells stacks. There are many Ascendancy options: Occultist, Trickster, Hierophant, Champion, Elementalist, and Ascendant. First, let's jump into build mechanics. Vortex is an instant cast spell that is usually automatically cast on cooldown by putting it on left click. It creates a large, stationary vortex that damages enemies inside. Vortex is huge quality of life for mapping and will kill most stragglers. Creeping Frost fires a ranged projectile that explodes when it lands or collides with an enemy, creating ground frost. This frost very slowly creeps towards nearby enemies, thus the name Creeping Frost. It's also spammable for a bit of extra damage on single target. Cold Snap creates chilled ground at your cursor that rapidly expands. It has a 3-second cooldown, however the cooldown can be bypassed by spending a frenzy charge. Any enemy that dies inside of Cold Snap has a 25% chance to grant you a frenzy charge, which allows it to be chain spammed while mapping. Bone Chill is linked to Cold Snap for extra damage on the other skills. Vaal Cold Snap is Cold Snap's cooler big brother. It creates a swirling cold vortex centered on your character that moves with you. While it's active, you're effectively playing Righteous Fire. It's fantastic for map clear, especially with a source of explosions or pops. Vaal Cold Snap damage does stack with Cold Snap, so it can also be used for single target burst damage. Here's a quick comparison between the 4 Cold Dot skills. The chilled ground from all of these skills deals cold damage over time to enemies standing inside of them. All of these spells hit, so exposure on hit is very nice. Cold Snap and Vaal Cold Snap have the biggest radius by far, which is why they're the bread and butter for mapping. Cold Snap's cast time is rather long, so cast speed is a very nice quality of life. There's sort of a misconception that Cold Dot is difficult to map with or that it has too many buttons, but while mapping it's mostly a 1-button build. You just spam Cold Snap. You can't blindly spam it though. Cold Snap should be well placed to maximize frenzy generation. There's a sort of feedback loop while mapping. The better you place Cold Snaps, the less likely you are to run out of frenzies while mapping. Map bosses or other tanky rares is generally the only time you curse or cast Creeping Frost. For bossing, there are quite a few buttons, but you only have to press each one every few seconds at most. Bossing revolves around maintaining both curses, Cold Snap, Creeping Frost, and being in range for Vortex. Massive chill effect makes dodging boss abilities much easier. While Cruelty is a very strong mapping link, don't use it for bossing as you usually won't get anywhere near the 40% Cruelty cap. Unfortunately, Elemental Overload doesn't work for Cold Dot, since Cold Degen is neither a hit nor an ailment. Since all Cold Dot spells hit, it's not really possible to take advantage of Elemental Equilibrium. Eye of Malice is often used to squeeze out extra damage, which reduces negative resistances even further. While Cold Dot is a great league starter, endgame it does take more investment to scale it to crazy levels than most builds. Alright, let's jump into each Ascendancy. First up, Occultist. Once upon a time, Occultist was one of the top Cold Dot Ascendancies. That changed in 3.20 when Occultist was reworked. The biggest changes were the loss of 15% curse effect and the powerful malediction debuff. To top it off, in the same patch, Anathema was added to the game. This ring provides easy access to 4 curses, further diluting Occultist's power. These days, Occultist is mostly relegated to power charge stacking or chaos dot. PoE has also slowly moved away from a pure mapping endgame with the addition of content such as Uber Bosses and Sanctum. This limits the usefulness of profane bloom pops, which can be replaced by the Legacy of Fury boots anyways. Next up, Trickster. It got a complete rework in 3.19. Trickster Cold Dot even saw some racing success that patch. I got first level 100 in SSFHC Mayhem and second in Endless Delirium playing it. Offensively, Trickster revolves around Polymath and taking as many useful masteries as possible. Unfortunately, 2 patches after Trickster's rework, there was a big mastery nerf. As an example, Cold Masteries now have nothing really worth taking on Cold Dot, but with Polymath, you're still encouraged to click one anyways. Trickster is still a very tanky and speedy mapper in hardcore, but the lack of damage and reliance on on-kill recovery doesn't quite cut it. Next, Hierophant, or Hyro. Hyro got a solid buff in 3.21. Arcane Surge grants a baseline 20% more spell damage. This increases to 32% more spell damage with a bit of Arcane Surge buff effect. Defensively, Hierophant redirects 50% of all damage taken to Energy Shield. Luckily, it can get a very large Energy Shield pool due to Sanctuary of Thought. The downside is that Energy Shield sustain is a bit clunky for early mapping. Energy Shield doesn't recharge while you're being hit, so it mostly relies on the Betrayal Beltcraft or Ghost Dance to sustain it. Burden of Truth is a strong late game option to supplement Energy Shield recovery. Hierophant Cold Dot is now quite solid, though it's only recommended for hardcore. Champion Cold Dot doesn't see much use mainly because it's not comfortably league startable, and once you have the currency or gear to play it, there's usually stronger build options in that budget range. Champ has amazing aura scaling, stun immunity, fortify, and adrenaline or cheat death. Despite its lack of popularity, Champ Cold Dot is still great in hardcore. Elementalist is the most popular Cold Dot Ascendancy by far, and for good reason. It has huge area of effect from Convergence, Mastermind of Discord synergizes nicely with Eye of Malice, Shaper of Storms pairs well with Chill. Non-damaging ailment effect is incredibly strong on Elementalist because it scales Chill, Shock, and Scorch. Chill effect is a surprisingly strong defensive layer, while Shock and Scorch are big damage multipliers. The Chilled Ground from Cold Dot skills can still chill while linked to Elemental Focus, except for Creeping Frost. I believe this is because Creeping Frost Ground is coded differently than normal Chilled Ground because it moves towards enemies. All in all, Elementalist is a fantastic Cold Dot Ascendancy. Last, Ascendant. Raider and Occultist is the standard setup, and it's a very speedy mapper and a solid bosser. I did Pathfinder and Elementalist in hardcore trade this league to mix it up a bit and make it more bossing oriented. It was built like a Pathfinder. Yeah, I might be addicted to Pathfinder. This build felt really good, comfortably farmed many Ubers in hardcore trade. Unfortunately, it's not league startable as it really starts to shine with expensive jewels and gear. Unnatural Instinct and Militant Faith in particular are very strong on Ascendant, giving more than 240 devotion. Ascendant Cold Dot is quite powerful with investment, and it's smooth to play. Here are my personal overall Cold Dot rankings. First is, you guessed it, Elementalist. It's the king of AoE, damage, and ailment scaling. It's fantastic in both softcore and hardcore. It's a very comfortable league starter. In every stage of the game, you can't go wrong with Elementalist. Second is Ascendant. While it does require heavy investment, and it's not league startable, it rivals and potentially even surpasses late game Elementalist in many scenarios. High movement speed, great clear, solid AoE, the curse scaling provides a lot of damage and defense from Enfeeble. Third is Hierophant. After the recent Arcane Surge buffs, Hyro is now a surprisingly solid Ascendancy. It's capable of achieving a massive life and energy shield pool without too much effort, and has solid damage to boot. Hyro has mostly replaced Trickster's niche as the tanky league start Cold Dot Ascendancy. Fourth is Champion. Champ is always strong defensively and it has aura effect for days, but outside of that it doesn't really do anything spectacular. It's also not league startable and is really only worth playing in hardcore. Fifth is Occultist. Nowadays it doesn't really offer much except a bit of damage. Profane Bloom being curse conditional kind of kills it for league starting. Blasphemy curses see very little use at the moment, and it's hard to justify the mana reservation. At the end of the day, anything Occultist can do, Elementalist simply does better. Last, and least, Trickster. It hurts a bit to put Trickster this low given how much I've played it, but it's really hard to recommend in its current state. The 3.21 Mastery rework heavily amplified Trickster's damage issues. Recovery on kill is also an unreliable defensive layer. Ultimately, in softcore, Elementalist is probably the way to go for most people. In hardcore, both Elementalist and Hyro have a place. Hyro is great for anyone that wants a tanky Cold Dot build where dying is not an option. Just be prepared to farm the Betrayal Beltcraft if you league start Hyro. For those with currency to invest, Ascendant is a solid option as a speedy mapper and bosser. The others, Champion, Occultist, and Trickster, are kind of niche at the moment, though they do have their uses. As always, thanks for watching. Let me know what your thoughts or experiences are with Cold Dot in the comments below.